Alrighty guys, welcome back. This is going to be part 2 of the series about designing, at least the concept of designing this, which would make things a lot easier in my sense and in the sense of simplicity of designing. Now, what we want to do is trucks have a straight or solid axle for the most part, and it's going to be converted where I'm going to be taking out the actual diff, cutting the two sides off, and then welding what's called a very simple, something that has been done with only a few of them, like the lead acid Ford Ranger and stuff, called the Dion axle, which is kind of like a wishbone where the axles run straight and then there's like a wishbone for rear support. But we're going to do a mixture of the two things. It's still going to technically be a straight axle, but we're going to shove the motor into the setup. And I'll explain in a little bit. But the reason why I wanted to go through this process is that other electric companies are making a axle that is going to be a solid axle in order for you to get this stuff done. There's one called the ES9000R. Also, Edison Motors, from the previous video that I mentioned, is doing something similar to this. And you can get this from the Ford Lightning, possibly, if they would ever give you the product in itself as the motor. But I want to reuse the Model Y and the UI interface as much as I can when it comes to this kind of process. So I'm going to get into it and start recording the screen now. So what you see in front of you right now is just a mix. Stop. Just want to move the screen. It's a mix between just showing you the example of a straight axle like GMC 3500 and also a Model 3 and Model Y rear drive unit. It's very similar in size. I made it so that it is in the correct orientation, I assume. If not, you can correct me and I'll do the rotation and everything else. But for the most part, you want to align where the axle shafts are going to go to where the outputs of the straight for the solid axles go. And once this is done, you'd be able to have this as a pretty good system. You would just have to cut off a certain point, which is here and here, for the whole half gear ratio in the back. Again, we're not trying to use it. We're trying to just do direct shaft, like for what the Model Y does, to the actual wheelbase. So everything can stay the same. Now, the challenges for this part is going to be finding the same teeth configuration so that the shaft axle goes into and modifies it so that everything works seamlessly. Welding is going to be a challenge when it comes to this kind of idea. And also at the same time, once I have everything working properly, I have to load test it to make sure that it can still tow like a GMC Sierra 3500 in one way, shape, or form, and just be able to do everything that I need to do. Everything else should be the same when it comes to plugging in the electrical components, plugging in the plumbing for the vehicle, for the motor itself. Brake lines are a little bit harder to do based on the first video, because on one of the sides of where the battery is, you actually have to remove the whole battery tray, the whole battery assembly from the frame of the vehicle for every sense, even for the new 4680 Model Y ones, because they just run the brake lines to be protected, but you have no serviceability to the brake lines if anything is faulted underneath where the battery is, or let alone you have to run new lines. I mean, you could be able to modify add an extension to it, but then you compromise the section that you have for the brake line in the first place in that one run. So might need to run new brake lines, something that needs to be done in that kind of sense. But besides that, that is the whole process when it comes to just the concept of doing it versus actually doing it and how it would work. Because you would have it wrapped around where the motor is, and then you would have it where the motor mounts are, so that where the actual motor is and the frame unit would still go with the axle, so that it has limited as much as you can for vibration. Again, it's still a truck, it's on leaf springs. It's going to be like that anyway in the first place. So it's not like a full uni suspension dealing in that kind of sense, or dealing with the Daedyon suspension, wishbone suspension, whatever you want to call it, and making it into that kind of hard base subject matter. So that's what I'm going to pursue in this kind of avenue, with a modified straight axle, solid axle, and hopefully this first one's going to be good. If not, if we fail, we find another way to do it. I'm still wanting to do a method that still works with the motor for the rear axle. The front axle, it's a little more self-explanatory. It's the same process, just with the front motor. And yeah, I might need to do a little bit of modification, because I have to make sure that it can fit through the system, and I can articulate the steering, and it's not going to interfere with the generator. But the generator is going to be also smaller than the previous motor, so there will be more play in order for where you want to put the generator, but that's beside the point. Besides that, everything else should be pretty good. What I'm going to be going for the next step, which is part 3, is I'm going to be trying to decide where and what kind of RPM. Now, I've already calculated that I need around like 50, 60 kilowatts in order for myself to properly charge, because there's software limits when it comes to regen brake charging, and then the amount of thermal capacity that is going to go into the vehicle. So it might need to have an upgraded radiator. I'm thinking so. I'm also thinking that it's going to be EV radiator and then the generator radiator in that kind of reciprocal order, because again, the heat load on the EV side isn't as extreme as the actual like diesel side, or if you use anything else. I'm specifically using diesel portion of this. Makes it easier in this kind of sense, and it's just something that I want to do. As for the other components, everything should still be Tesla, and it should still work, because I'm trying to keep everything together, trying to keep it so that everything is just right there, and then the generator should be in front of it. If it doesn't work out that way, I'll make it so that I can drop it in the bed, and I can just have it cool down naturally, because it's in the back of the bed. If I get an 8-foot bed, I keep everything in a 2-foot spacing as much as possible. I would rather not do that, because then that just has less room for the bed. Doesn't look seamless. I'm still going to try it that way anyway. But this is part 2, guys. Part 3 will be coming out at some point. I'm still trying to figure out the designing process for it, and just the working precedence, so that I can show this kind of truck, or at least get the truck, or get a truck, or something like that, so I can work on these designs more that I can do. Oh, and by the way, old time fans of this is old trap based videos from Conan Exiles. I can't wait to play the new game Power World, which is kind of similar, kind of not, because you're doing things, but it's kind of like monsters, and it's very similar to Pokemon, but it's not. But then there's weapons, and how you have thralls, you have slaves of like your monsters, and it's gonna be interesting on when I'm gonna be playing that, but we'll see on how much my son lets me because he's 7 months old. So, see you guys till we have part 3.